Welcome to First Principles Podcast. This is Trees.
And this is Elliot.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about some stuff related to electricity and kind of like the green side of electricity, the renewable energy side of electricity. There's been a lot of talk about incorporating more renewable power sources such as solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, nuclear power, so on and so forth, into the current electricity grid. And we're going to be looking at that, just what the status of that is, and how it ties into certain policies as well. There's, the Green New Deal, which obviously has gotten a lot of talk, and, how does the Green New Deal look at things like electricity production? How do they view nuclear power? And so on and so forth. There's going to be like a lot of analysis on electricity, power generation, all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely seems like the wind is blowing towards decarbonization, and I think it's more important now than ever to discuss the right way to do this and the wrong way to do this. And with the current win in the U.S. elections right now by Biden there and Kamala, we're going to see a lot more of this being discussed. And I think if you haven't checked out our last episode on the Green New Deal, definitely go back and check that out. We dissect the Green New Deal in detail and give our thoughts on it and what we liked about, what we didn't like about it. And this will be a little bit of an extension on that podcast. But we're changing up the format a bit here. You won't be able to see our pretty faces on YouTube for this. This is going to be an audio-only podcast episode, and we're going to do a bit more media dissection in this podcast than maybe you've seen in our past episodes.
And don't cry. It's okay. I know you're super sad. You're not going to see our faces, but no worries.
Don't worry. We still have faces.
Yeah. Most importantly, we do have faces. Okay, yeah, so that's an important point. We're going to start with doing some media analysis, digestion of clips, pop culture, really just trying to take a look at the culture. I think it's undoubtable that we've entered the culture wars, so it's important to digest how the culture is impacting things like environmental movements, things like green technology, so on and so forth. So we're going to be digesting whether it's newspaper clips, whether it's videos, whatever, and trying to hold people accountable, or maybe not hold people accountable, but just really assess how things are moving, how culture is shifting, and analyze it from first principles, as is the goal of this podcast.
Couldn't have said it better. Yeah, and I think it's really important because right now it's so easy to follow news on the topic of climate change and energy through headlines. And as most people know, headlines nowadays are very misleading. The amount of information you could glean by taking a bit of time to actually dig a bit deeper than the headline, not just reading the article, but go back, what did politician A, B say actually? What did this head of this company actually say? I think that's important because so much is taken out of context that without taking the time to actually dig into these things, you can leave with a very misguided sense of where things are actually headed. So there's a lot to cover in this area, in the environmental area, and we could talk about it. So we're gonna chisel away at this in small chunks, and try to stay up to date with what's going on in the world in regards to climate change, new environmental technologies, innovations, and keep you informed in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds good. All the policies, the technologies, the engineering, how it all ties. Yeah, we'll be going in on that stuff. Do you want to jump into some of these clips we have set up here?
For sure. All right, so I wanted to take everyone back to October 7th, when we had the 2020 vice presidential debates in the U.S. We had Vice President Mike Pence debating Senator Kamala Harris. I don't know. I think they got millions of views in the States. It wasn't, I don't know how long people actually stayed tuned into it, but up in here in Canada, I only heard bits and pieces of the debate. And so what I want to go through is one in particular question that relates more to the climate and environmental policies of these different parties here. One thing to note, this debate was moderated by Susan Page. She's an American journalist, and she is currently the Washington bureau chief for US Today, which is a large media company in the States, if you didn't know. So when you're listening to this clip, which you're about to hear is going to be the question read by Susan Page, I think it's very important to listen to the adjectives and qualifiers in the question. Go ahead and play the clip.
And Vice President Pence, I'd like to pose the first question to you. This year, we've seen record-setting hurricanes in the South. Another one, Hurricane Delta, is now threatening the Gulf. And we have seen record-setting wildfires in the West. Do you believe, as the scientific community has concluded, that man-made climate change has made wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and have made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Okay. So what a lengthy question that is. And it's funny because as you're watching this, from the feed that I snipped this from. This was a YouTube video of the debates as they were broadcast on Fox News, which tends to lean to the right, to a more of a Republic audience. But the question that was read by Susan, that was posed to Mike Pence, was condensed to this question: do you believe climate change has made wildfires and hurricanes more intense? That's a much more succinct question. And if you look back at the qualifiers in the original question, it makes for a very politically hard, makes it very politically hard for Pence to respond. And let me bring up two parts. So they add this in. She says, do you believe, as the scientific community has concluded, right there, that's an extra little bit that there's some contention, that man-made, that's another part, climate change, is responsible for making wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and has made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging. So let me just go off a little bit on these two different qualifiers that were in these questions. So first off, this whole, you've heard this, the scientific community has concluded. Well, and you might have heard someone say, 97% of scientists agree. And if you go to NASA's website, they have an article there, and I want to read you a little excerpt from it. So on NASA's website on climate change, they say this: multiple studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals show that 97% or more of actively publishing climate scientists agree, and there's an asterisk here, that climate warming trends over the past century are extremely likely due to human activities. In addition, most of the leading scientific organizations worldwide have issued public statements endorsing this position. The following is a partial list of these organizations, along with a link of their published statements and a section of related resources. So I'll read you some of the different organizations here that have endorsed this. And, we have the American Association of Advancements of Science, and they're saying, based on well-established evidence, about 97% of climate scientists have concluded that human-caused climate change is happening. We have the American Chemical Society saying the Earth's climate is changing in response to increasing concentrations in greenhouse gases and particulate matter in the atmosphere, largely as a result of human activity. And then it goes on and on. We have the American Geophysical Union, American Medical Association, American Meteorological Society, American Physical Society, Physical Society, the Geological Society of America. Okay. So
A bunch of them.
There's a lot of active players here, right? But let's go back. I want to, they put this little asterisk in there on their site. So here's the asterisk. It was right after the first sentence there that said multiple studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals show that 97% or more of actively publishing climate scientists agree. Asterisk. The asterisk says this.
Wait, agree what?
Agree that, well, it should go on, agree that climate change is happening and it's man-made. That's what I conclude.
Right.
So, and the asterisk that they add on NASA's website is this. Technically, a consensus is a general agreement of opinion, but the scientific method steers us away from this to an objective framework, because opinion is not really what we're going for here. Because opinion, this is, when you're talking objective, it means without the influence of personal feeling or opinions, right? In science, they're saying facts or observations are explained by hypothesis, a statement of a possible explanation for some natural phenomena, which can then be tested and retested until it is refused or disproved. Okay, it goes on. As scientists gather more observations, they will build off one explanation and add details to complete a picture. Eventually, a group of hypotheses might be integrated and generalized into a scientific theory, a scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles offered to explain a phenomena. Okay, so this is very important for this to be clarified here, because of the 3% of there's 3% of journals that aren't explaining that climate change is through man-made sources, and they've been peer reviewed. Okay, and I think this is very important fact to always realize is, just because a majority has an opinion, okay, doesn't mean it's always correct. In this case, I think it is correct. Let me preface this by saying this. And I think it's always important that we encourage people to look at alternatives, especially in the scientific community, that alternatives need to be considered, because you might have a set of hypotheses that explain it well and repeatedly, but you could still be completely off. And what we seem to be heading towards right now is scientific dogma, where we've given science the absolute authority. And with dogma comes the lack of being able to dispute it, to question it. And if we get to that point, that's a very dangerous point to be, because we've given the scientific community extreme power, and power is corruptive. It tends to lead to corruption. So just want to point out here, okay, I have no problem with 97% of scientific papers believe that man-made climate change is happening. But just wanted to point out a few, parts of what that means. And also always remember, 97% of people raising their hand or saying A doesn't mean that A is correct. It just means the majority of people think A is correct. It still could be the 3%. So right there, because the Republican Party, tends to lean, from what I've seen, to look at that 3% of papers that don't contribute man-made impacts or influences towards climate change. They point to those studies more frequently than perhaps the left does. And so right away, this is just a hard question for him to answer. I wanted to jump over to the man-made stuff, and while the man-made stuff is pretty clear, I think I've already said that. It's just one of those descriptors that's just very contentious, and they didn't need to throw it in, and they actually cut it out when they wrote the more succinct question. So let's go over now. Actually, no, before I do that, this is what I thought when I heard that question. I'm like, okay, interesting question, but not really. So what? Like, he's going to answer this, and I know he's not going to answer it directly. But personally, okay, this is what I would think is a better question to ask in a presidential debate. Something like this. Okay, hurricanes and wildfires are hitting America hard. What measures does your administration plan to implement to aid with this problem? Okay, I like this way more, because this allows both sides to open up about maybe some sort of novel solution they have to it. Because even if you can't agree on what's causing it, that doesn't mean you can't come up with good solutions to solve the problem. For example, let's talk both hurricanes and wildfires. hurricanes. Okay, climate change is making them, hit harder, right? But they're still happening. They've been happening for years in America. Okay, but we still continue to build cities near the water. Great. It's hard to move people away from their home. It's difficult to do. But what I would want to hear from an administration is you don't need to agree on why the hurricane's hitting hard. But if you agree that the hurricanes are hitting hard, what are you going to do about it? And that, so that's where I'm like, they're getting stuck on trying to argue over something that's not as relevant to helping the people that they're supposed to be helping.
Yeah, like you want to be more specific about the issue. Essentially, like you don't want to just say like, okay, the issue is climate change. Do you agree on that? No, the issue is pollution. The issue is water quality. These are like specific things you can name, and it's a bit more concrete than just leaving like broad terms and then arguing over semantics and broad things that really don't have an impact on people's day-to-day lives, as opposed to like the really like meat and bones type of stuff,
Exactly. And for going specifically back to climate change, if you have an administration that agrees, to tackle head-on climate change, it's going to take years, 50, 100 years for a lot of the things that we do now. My understanding that if the measures implemented now will still take a lot of time for them to help balance that, and it's not even going to necessarily always reverse it. It's just going to stop it from increasing. So what does that mean? You're still going to have hurricanes. They're still going to come and hit. We don't need to focus on why this is happening. You really need to go, okay, for wildfires, can we do something better about managing our forests and stuff like this? And this is something that Republicans will just tell you all about, how they're going to help with this. So to me, it's just like, let's look at solutions again here to a problem instead of arguing about why the problem is happening. Although I think it is important to acknowledge what the majority of scientists are telling you. But I think here in this political stage, not necessarily the best question that could be asked in a presidential debate. Okay, so this is Mike Pence's response. I want to listen to this next clip. And one thing I want to say before, you're going to hear in this clip and Kamala's clip, just skipping the audio. This is me just cutting out a YouTube ad. The audio is still complete. It's just the ad being cut out.
Okay. One thing I will say just to add to that beforehand is that like of the 97% that do agree that there's anthropogenic or man-made contributions to climate change, then of those 97%, what percentage of them actually believe that it's the only impact, or you know what I mean? Or do they also contribute, okay, there's natural climate change happening as well in addition to man-made climate change, and then how are those two interplaying with one another? Like of those 97%, I would imagine some of them would be like that too, right? But maybe they just don't get as much clout because, it implies being more nuanced about situation. It implies going into more details about it, kind of, and then that's where you lose people. Once you get too much into the details, people tune out.
Yeah. And so I want to actually go back to, I think the main reference this 97% is coming from came from this journal. Scientific journal write-up in Environmental Research Letter, Volume 11, Number 4. And here's a quote. So it says, the number of papers rejecting AGW, that's anthropogenic global warming or human-caused global warming, is a minuscule proportion of the published research, with the percentage slightly decreasing over time. Among papers expressing a position on AGW, an overwhelming percentage, 97.2 based on self-rating and 97.1 based on abstract rating, endorse the scientific consensus on AGW. Again, to your point, all they're saying is they agree with AGW, which is just saying, yes, humans are contributing to global warming. It's not saying they're not. None of those are clearly stating their opinion on what percentage of it is, if they think it's exclusively that, and how other factors are contributing to it, non-anthropogenic as well.
Which is really where the conversation becomes a bit more complicated, right? Because then you start to factor in, okay, there's anthropogenic climate change, but then there's natural climate change, and then it becomes a game of, okay, how do you evaluate which one is contributing more than the other?
Absolutely, because why would you write a policy to cut down on fossil fuels if 70% is due to of global warming and climate change impacts are due to natural out of man's control influences basically on this planet? It wouldn't make sense to necessarily hit it as hard.
Right. If you're going to have a minuscule impact by your actions, whereas the majority of the impact is in something that is beyond your control, it's kind of like we got to put things into perspective and see things from the big picture. Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to go into that second clip?
Let's do it.
Well, first, I'm very proud of our record on the environment and on conservation. According to all of the best estimates, our air and land are cleaner than any time ever recorded. Our water is among the cleanest in the world. And just a little while ago, the President signed the Outdoors Act. It's the largest investment in our public lands and public parks in 100 years. So President Trump has made a commitment to conservation and to the environment. Now, with regard to climate change, the climate is changing, but the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would put us back in the Paris Climate Accord. They'd impose the Green New Deal, which would crush American energy, would increase the energy costs of American families in their homes, and literally would crush American jobs. And President Trump and I believe that the progress that we have made in a cleaner environment has been happening precisely because we have a strong free market economy. You know, what's remarkable is the United States has reduced CO2 more than the countries that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, but we've done it through innovation, and we've done it through natural gas and fracking, which, Senator, the American people can go look at the record. I know Joe Biden says otherwise now, as you do, but the both of you repeatedly committed to abolishing fossil fuel and banning fracking. And so by creating the kind of American innovation, we're actually steering toward a stronger and better environment. With regard to wildfires, President Trump and I believe that forest management has to be front and center, and even Governor Gavin Newsom from your state has agreed we've got to work on forest management. And with regard to hurricanes, the National Oceanic Administration tells us that actually as difficult as they are,
Thank you, Vice President.
There are no more hurricanes today than there were 100 years ago.
Thank you.
But many of the climate alarmists use hurricanes and wildfires to try and sell their bill of goods of a Green New Deal. And President Trump and I are going to always put American jobs and American workers first.
I love when you try to get the last, 10 seconds over time. Just I gotta say that last little bit here.
Yeah, just pay no mind, keep on talking, even though they're trying to pause, get you to stop. Like, nope, I'm gonna finish this thought. I don't care.
Yeah, and actually, this debate is so much better than the actual presidential debate. Like, these two candidates are way more respectful of not talking over top of each other. But still,
for the first one, anyway.
Yeah, for the first one. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is, all I heard when Trump got into office was Trump is a climate change denier, okay? And he's dismantling the U.S. EPA. And he has done some of that. And I do want to dive into some of the changes that have happened to the U.S. EPA, maybe in another podcast. But it was clear from that response from Mike Pence that whether or not these are the real beliefs of Donald Trump, which I don't suspect they are, but it's clear that his administration, is willing. He says clearly there that the climate is changing. That's not the disputed fact. He says there. He says the climate is changing, but the issue is what's the cause and what do we do about it? Okay. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to point out there, because I had no idea what this was when he mentioned it, but he talks about President Trump signing this significant act. It was the Great American Outdoor Act I just quickly looked into what this is. So here's a quick bit on this. So this is the Great American Outdoor Act. Each year, millions of people from all over the world visit and enjoy our national parks. This is in the U.S. Yet today, more than 5,500 miles of paved roads and 1,700 miles of trails and 2,400 buildings in our national park are in need of maintenance and improvements. Fulfilling President Donald Trump's promise to restore, conserve, and protect Americans' land, the Great American Outdoors Act provides the necessary funds dedicating up to 1.9 billion per year for 5 years to funds deferred maintenance projects identified by the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Indian Education. These infrastructure updates will preserve our most important national treasures and give more Americans and their families opportunities to explore the great outdoors.
1.8 billion per year, eh? Dang.
Right.
For
Yeah.
5 years. It's a pretty penny.
It's a pretty penny. Now, when I read this, though, I do think it's preserving parkland, but it's specifically preserving infrastructure in these lands. But it's, to me, it's not necessarily an indication to do anything with climate change, but it is evidence of, there is a will within that former administration to maintain some of the environment, natural environment in America, which I just thought was interesting because I personally was led to believe, and I think a lot of people were led to believe that was not of interest at all by the administration. So that is the other thing is the Paris Climate Accord. That's a whole can of worms we could get into, and maybe it's a topic for another podcast. But that's the other part, which it isn't so. I won't even comment on that. Let's play the next. Let's listen to what Kamala Harris has to say.
Okay. And is this Kamala Harris's response to just to set it up?
Just to set it up. Susan, the moderator, is going to ask another question. She's not going to get the same question as Mike Pence did. So you'll hear the question from Susan, and then you'll hear her response.
Okay, cool.
Senator Harris, as the Vice President mentioned, you co-sponsored the Green New Deal in Congress. But Vice President Biden said in last week's debate that he does not support the Green New Deal. But if you look at the Biden-Harris campaign website, it describes the Green New Deal as a crucial framework. What exactly would be the stance of a Biden-Harris administration toward the Green New Deal? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact. I will repeat that Joe Biden has been very clear that he thinks about growing jobs, which is why he will not increase taxes for anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. Joe Biden's economic plan, Moody's, which is a reputable Wall Street firm, has said will create 7 million more jobs than Donald Trump's. And part of those jobs that will be created by Joe Biden are going to be about clean energy and renewable energy. Because you see, Joe understands that the west coast of our country is burning, including my home state of California. Joe sees what is happening on the Gulf states, which are being battered by storms. Joe has seen and talked with the farmers in Iowa, whose entire crops have been destroyed because of floods. And so Joe believes, again, in science. I'll tell you something, Susan. I served, when I first got to the Senate, on the committee that's responsible for the environment. Do you know this administration took the word science off the website and then took the phrase climate change off the website? We have seen a pattern with this administration, which is they don't believe in science. And Joe's plan is about saying we're going to deal with it, but we're also going to create jobs. Donald Trump, when asked about the wildfires in California, and the question was, the science is telling us this, you know what Donald Trump said? Science doesn't know. So let's talk about who is prepared to lead our country over the course of the next 4 years on what is an existential threat to us as human beings. Joe is about saying we're going to invest that in renewable energy. It's going to be about the creation of millions of jobs. We will achieve net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Joe has a plan. This has been a lot of talk from the Trump administration, and really it has been to go backward instead of forward. We will also re-enter the climate agreement with pride.
Okay. So you heard in that clip that the Biden-Harris campaign website described the Green New Deal as a crucial framework.
Yeah.
But
Which she didn't address at all in the question.
right, she then goes on to say, but Biden doesn't support the Green New Deal, or that's not even that was what the moderator said. So I went back and found what he said there. This is from the presidential debate. Let's quickly play that clip. That's clip 4.
You support?
No, I don't support the Green New Deal.
You don't? Oh, well, that's a big statement.
I
That
support
means you
the
just
Biden.
lost the radical left.
I
That's
support
you
the
don't.
Biden plan that I put forward.
Okay.
The Biden plan, which is different than what he calls the radical Green New Deal.
Okay, so he doesn't support the Green New Deal. It's a crucial framework, but he supports the Biden plan. So what is the Biden plan? Let's look here. So we got a little taste of it in Senator Harris's response there. So, Joe Biden's plan still involves moving the grid off of fossil fuels towards renewables, but his timeline is less ambitious, which was one of our biggest criticisms of the Green New Deal.
And for many people too.
For many people too. And if you're not familiar with the Green New Deal and the goals of it, go back one episode and you'll hear us go right through all of it.
Yep.
So instead of it being 10 years from when the Green New Deal was first proposed, which was 2019, which would have made it by 2030, he's talking about net zero emissions happening in 2050 and carbon neutral by 2035. And this is actually a bigger plan. That's, I believe, come out of the UN, and it's all under the Build Back Better that a lot of countries are doing post-COVID. It's regarding, you'll hear them talking about it in the UK, in European countries. These targets of 2050 for carbon neutral all coming there. So Joe Biden's plan, very similar to this global plan.
Wait, but when they say net zero 2050, carbon neutral 2035, aren't those the same thing? What's the difference?
So carbon neutral would be essentially you are capturing and releasing carbon at equal amounts, right? And then net zero.
So net zero.
Net zero emissions.
Is that what that's
Net zero emissions. Yeah.
The difference between the two is zero, or is neutral.
We should look into that. I don't know. That is
Or just like fancy semantics for people to to distract people. I don't know. We'll have to look into that.
yeah. And
Side tangent. Maybe it could be my total lack of awareness. So,
but he will. Joe Biden will not ban fracking, as also pointed out there. And when I looked through the campaign website, it seems to me that saying the Green New Deal is a crucial framework is really just pandering for votes for people that support the Green New Deal, because it really, if you look at his plan, it has a lot of what's in the Green New Deal not even discussed. Like, the Green New Deal is both environmental and socioeconomical, all this stuff about jobs, guarantees, and stuff like that. None of that stuff is in Biden's plan. So I really think the Green New Deal stuff from Biden's perspective was just added in there. From Kamala's, Harris's.
wait, so you're saying even though it's on his website, he doesn't support GND?
Even though it's on, I think he added that it's a crucial framework, like that was added onto the website because Senator Harris, because this is the Harris Biden presidency, right? We at most we're going to get 4 years of or not most, sorry. I guess for the next 4 years, we're going to have Biden, right? The U.S. will have Biden as our president. And there is, so to me, this, but it is both a Biden, it's been pushed as a very much Biden-Harris, campaign. So,
Yeah.
and Senator Harris has been pro-Green New Deal. And I believe the statements that were said there previously about banning fracking are true.
Yeah.
So they had this opinion and were vocally saying it in the past, but
They're not going to ban it, but they're going to phase it out.
or phase it out, right?
Just a backwards way of saying the same thing.
Right. What going back to it is, it resembles only portions of some of the climate target, like the net zero stuff. It's about like basically banning fossil fuels. That's the similarity of the Green New Deal. I think them saying it's a crucial framework was really just to get people on Senator Harris's side in that community of people that supported the Green New Deal to vote Joe Biden, Senator Harris. That's why I think it was more to do with why it's up there.
That's the thing, though. Like, he is pro all that extra socio-economic stuff that's attributed to the Green New Deal. That's my perspective, anyways, on Biden. Is that, yeah, the Green New Deal, there's the environmental stuff, then there's the socioeconomic stuff. And I guess what you're saying is that Biden, he's incorporating the environmental stuff and leaving out the socioeconomic stuff. My contention is he is very much pro both of those things, both the socioeconomic reliefs, because he's going to be spending out the wazoo, that's for sure. And
Right.
Also with the environmental stuff, he's pro on both fronts.
Oh yeah, taxes are going up. But I mean, I didn't look into Biden's plans outside of his plan specifically for climate. His climate stuff didn't. I guess maybe, of course, he will have his stance on all the other parts of it. So there could be a lot of similarities there.
Yeah.
But let's not get tied up too much on that.
Fair.
One thing she ends with is this, off the cuff kind of remark about climate change being an existential threat. Let's hear this next clip from Susan, the moderator says, or basically poses a question to Mike Pence. Do you believe that climate change is an existential threat? Let's see what he has to say.
Nothing like the existential threat question.
Climate change is an existential threat. Vice President Pence, do you believe that climate change poses an existential threat?
As I said, Susan, the climate is changing. We'll follow the science. But once again, Senator Harris is denying the fact that they're going to raise taxes on every American. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that on day one he was going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. Those tax cuts delivered $2,000 in tax relief to the average family of four across America. And with regard to banning fracking, I just recommend that people look at the record. You yourself said repeatedly that you would ban fracking. You were the first Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And while Joe Biden denied the Green New Deal, Susan, thank you for pointing out, the Green New Deal is on their campaign website. And as USA Today said, it's essentially the same plan as you co-sponsored with AOC when she submitted it in the Senate. And you just heard the senator say that she's going to resubmit America to the Paris Climate Accord. Look, the American people have always cherished our environment. We'll continue to cherish it. We've made great progress reducing CO2 emissions through American innovation and the development of natural gas through fracking. We don't need a massive $2 trillion Green New Deal that would impose all new mandates on American businesses and American families.
Thank you.
Joe Biden wants us to retrofit 4 million American business buildings. It makes no sense. It will cost jobs. President Trump is going to put America first. He's going to put jobs first, and we're going to take care of our environment and follow the science.
Thank you.
Okay. So, of course, he doesn't answer the question. But I don't blame him, because I think, again, the question on whether or not climate change is an existential threat is a tricky question to answer. Because let me ask you this. Are volcano eruptions an existential threat? Are asteroid impacts an existential threat? Well, They could be if it's a super volcano. If it's a very large asteroid, sure. But small asteroid, not a big problem. Small volcano, not a big problem. So to me, it's like you're asking, is it an existential threat? Climate change? Could be. I think it's a matter of how fast, how hard it is going to hit us, and what is our ability to adapt to it. Because if we can adapt to it, it's not the existential threat that the large asteroid is or the supervolcano. That's a very quick, sudden event that we have no time to react to. Now, we're talking about a gradual increase that is increasing in its speed based off current models for climate change. But even with the projections we're headed on now, the thought that we cannot adapt and not and in a way that doesn't result in massive casualties to the planet is not something that I think is out of the question. And that's what I want to highlight here. So just because he doesn't straight up say he doesn't think it's an existential threat isn't, to me, because I would see some people saying, well, he doesn't take this seriously. I think, you can say it's not an existential threat because you're taking these other things into consideration. Like adaptation is huge for us here in this case. And, if we end up with climate change hitting us so hard that we end up in a Mad Max world, I think that is not a complete wipeout of the human species, but yeah, it hit us hard enough that might as well be an existential threat. But if we get hit and, we're backing up cities, having to change the way we grow food, all this stuff over the period of the next 100 years, it's going to be a challenge, but it's not an existential threat. It's not going to wipe us out or put us into a post apocalyptic world is what I wanted to say here.
It's like they're almost painting this day after tomorrow scenario, like that movie where freaking all the water rose up to the Statue of Liberty, all the way up to the hand of the Statue of Liberty. Then like the snow came down, like it's like on that level for them.
It's on that level that like suddenly
it's like there's an asteroid 20 days away from hitting the planet. Like we're about to die. Like this is life and death.
It's such an exaggeration, and yeah.
And it's like, it's not to negate the seriousness of the issue,
No.
but it's like when you're gonna like emphasize it to such a to the nth degree where it brings all this like anxiety into people, then that's when you kind of lose them. And they're like, oh, well, you know what? It's just futile. You know what? I'm just gonna give up. But like because a lot of times when you just put all that on people, it's an existential crisis, like we're gonna die, like do something, people are just like, just tune out. People just tune out. They don't got time for that. They gotta worry about like their bills. They gotta like more, concrete stuff, paying the food, paying the bills, making sure there's food on the table, all that stuff.
Yeah. I think because there are multiple people that will tune it out. It's like I got other things to do than to think about this. And then there's if you look into it enough, you realize, okay, this is a horrible exaggeration. You tune it out because it just sounds ridiculous. And then there's people that are literally taking it to the point because they feel the anxiety. This is what we've talked about in past episodes about
Climate anxiety.
That this motivating protest, but the part of what has caused the climate anxiety has been media exaggeration and political exaggeration of the problem, not because it's not serious and it is a big problem, but because they felt to explain it at the appropriate level was not going to be good enough to achieve the response they need.
Mm-hmm. We got to dial it up to 11.
Dial it up to 11.
Crisis mode. Get your shit together.
Danger.
There's a tidal wave about to wipe out the city type of like vibes.
Yes, DEFCON 7 or whatever. Yeah. So, well, that is the wrap up of what I had there.
Yeah. No. So those are some interesting clips, and it kind of like goes to show like neither politician will really answer a question straight.
Yep.
And one thing I will say about Pence's response was, though, he did say we'll follow the science, so it's not like a direct response, but it's kind of like both sides of the aisle would give a typical response like that. So it's like, it is what it is. Like, no, they're all the same.
Yeah.
We'll follow the science. We'll follow the science. And then
Okay.
the other guy's like, you're not following the science. Then you're not following the science. So it's like, who's actually following the science? Like, what the hell? Like, both parties accuse the other of not following the science, and both parties claim to be following the science. So, like, do your math there. Like, just doesn't add up. Something doesn't add up. So it's like, which of the realities do you believe?
Yeah.
And I mean, and the truth is that it's probably somewhere in between. One is talking about forest management, right? Forest management is important. Yeah, you don't want to leave a bunch of dead bushes and dead leaves and all this stuff accumulating there, because it leads to more things that can burn. Like it's not like rocket science here.
Yeah. And just going back to the science part, it is obnoxious to me when I hear, and it tends to happen way more on the left, follow the science, follow the science. They will only follow the science when the science is saying what they want it to say. When there is good scientific work being done that goes against something, you will not hear about it, and it will be pushed up against. And whatever they can, in a lot of cases, whatever they can do to discredit it will happen. So it's like, listen to the science, but only if it's fitting the narrative that we're building our administration around.
Yeah. Which really means that you're dishonest and disingenuous with your claims of following the science, and it's really petty, and I can't really trust you. So it's like, okay, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Because you're saying follow the science, but meanwhile, I see you doing all this dishonest, shady stuff where you're not actually following the science yourself, making it seem as though you are. You're posturing, but in reality, that's not what's taking place. Even with this moderator, like some of the questions, like the way that it was phrased, it was like, do you believe the conclusions of the scientific community? It's like, let me put it like this: science is never conclusive. As soon as you say that it's conclusive, then you're probably inconclusive. If that makes sense. That was a silly way of saying that there's never there's never a conclusion in science, even when it comes to something that we know to be 100% true, even when it comes to something like evolution and
gravity,
gravity and light. Is it a particle or is it a wave? That debate raged on forever within science. So I just dislike this whole notion that the scientific community is always unanimous on something. There's no diverse opinions within the scientific community. It's just a really dishonest take of how science is done.
Yeah.
And it's mostly these freaking art journalist people trying to talk about science, but they don't even know what the hell is science about. Maybe they took one chemistry course in like grade 10, and then they're like, okay, screw this, out of here. Now they're talking about science. Like, bro, you don't even know science slaps you in your face.
They are
like, the hell talking about science.
There's a lot of people I find, or I listen to in the media, that have no problem being subservient to science. Like, almost like, as long as it comes from a scientific body, whatever they say, they have no problem parroting as the undisputed truth. And I think here's not the issue, because science generates a lot of valid material, and when it comes to climate stuff, I think there are a lot of important studies out there that are telling us, somewhat accurate things, and accurate things. Somewhat, everything comes with error bars, but I'm not dismissing any of it. My point here is, if you're asked as an individual, if you're not in the scientific community, whether you think this is good science and it's not your field of expertise, you can, rely on, just the group of scientists in there. They have specialized knowledge. You can count on them to do it. But I would respect you for saying, okay, I've looked at this vague, a little bit as well. It makes sense to me in a general sense, but you don't have the specialized knowledge, so you shouldn't really be commenting on unless you completely understand it. like what the validity of it is. So when you have a politician or anybody being asked whether they believe in science, it's very hard because they have to just take it at that specialized person's conclusion. Like they're and to me it's like everything, you can trust it, but the best response to it, if someone says, do you believe in this scientific article, especially if there's two that have contradictory outcomes, is somebody that says, yeah, I need to go look at it. This is like a politician I'm talking about. I'm gonna listen to this guy's argument from experts and listen to this guy's experts, and then here I'm gonna come back to you. I don't know. That's what I want to hear them say they're gonna do. Not just they'll just choose a side and just expect yes, that's it. But
where you pretty much have the answer in mind and you just kind of seek whatever side will feed that to you with that kind of confirmation bias, where you're just kind of looking for people that will just say what you want them to say, that yes man mentality, and everybody just wants that yes man, that validation. Feels so good, like yes you agree with me, yes. There's like a psychological strength to that. But to say that there's scientific like a unanimous scientific voice and there's no discussion about within science about how things progress, like how do you think science progresses, how do you think things change? Because people take in different models, different theories about how the world works, they test them, they get results, they repeat the test, get similar results, and then the models develop, science changes. So like the same people that say believe in science are almost like limiting and shrinking science to such a small window, and they're holding it as science in one specific time, in one specific place. Meanwhile, science is diverse, science is changing, science is ever flowing. Every time you think science, it can move, like. So for you to hold on to like science as though it's some certain point, okay, we have science, therefore we have certainty. I feel like that's what people are like, have this some sort of like weird fantasy that if they have science, they have certainty, they have all the answers.
Right.
But it's like, sorry, science doesn't give you all the answers. Science just gives you a set of tools that you can use to figure things out. Science in itself isn't the end all be all to your problems.
No.
And it's almost being like it's almost being used in this dogmatic way where it's just like follow the science or die. Like it's almost this religion. Science is the new religion.
I've heard that.
Science is the new religion of people, where you either follow it or if you don't, then you're not part of my crew, and let's wage a war on you. It's like
dogma. As soon as something becomes dogma, unquestionable, it's a problem. And science is all about question everything. And there's been look at this. We used to think that the sun rotated around the Earth. Now we realize the Earth rotates around the sun. Okay, that's just an example of a complete flip of a concept, right? I'm not saying this, and I don't think you're saying this to try to undermine the fact that man-made climate change is these articles are just are wrong. But I'm saying it is so important to allow the community, in the scientific community, to continue to push on counter arguments to that. Okay, because if that keeps happening and we keep getting the same result where, oh yeah, it looks like man-made climate change is the driving factor, then we're in a better spot to say conclusively it is the case. Why are we closing the book on it? Or why is the media and politicians making us have to right now stop? This is the conclusion. We must go by this right now. It's because they want this to be the conclusion so that they can enact with a confidence their policies and plans. And honestly, there are some of these policies and plans are going to be good for the environment and the climate, but there are other things gained by them implementing these that are outside interests beyond just climate change. And we'll probably talk about this more in another episode, but it's very disturbing to me that they just want to say, book closed. Here we are, that 3%, they're nothing. listen to this 97%. And again, if you look at science too, the other part about science is it comes at a lot of universities. Universities need funding, and so money does drive the direction studies go, and that doesn't completely corrupt and bias scientists across the board, but it does prioritize what they study, and it's another thing that everybody has to keep in mind, that research being done in one direction, if that's where the money coming from, is going to get more attention and more research. So
Yeah,
you have to balance that
gotta,
into everything as well.
You got to get the money to do the research, right? That's the game that these researchers, professors are always doing. They're trying to sell it as super important, super critical work, so they can get the funding, this and that. But I want to say that even if 97% of scientists do believe in and acknowledge anthropogenic climate change, to me, what is the follow up to that in terms of, okay, what's the solution? And the solution that's being proposed is just, okay, we'll go and use solar and wind. That's like the extent of the solution that I'm really hearing. We'll go on to the Paris Climate, Accord, which pretty much means, carbon taxes, so jack up the taxes. And it's like, what are the solutions that they're actually proposing? They haven't really proposed anything. Like, they just said, we're going to follow the science. What does that mean? Wind and solar. Okay, wind and solar, great. But you know what? There's going to be a whole slew of other technologies that you need in association with wind and solar. So how is that all going to play out? Oh, that's where the Green New Deal comes in, eh? That's where your framework comes in. Oh, well, you just said you weren't for it. But so are you or not? Like, because wind and solar, that's the huge thing of Green New Deal. So I guess if you're taking that, then wind and solar is your main solution. So is that what the scientific community is purporting is the best solution? Right? So again, 97% agrees with climate change. Okay, but then what do they conclude as the solution being? Right? Well, nobody talks about that. And I'm sure that the solutions being proposed by these scientists are not all unanimous where, 97% believe it, this is the solution. Because, hey, you know what? Everybody's geographical region is different. Everybody's dealing with a different set of circumstances. Some people are coastal. Some people are more along fault lines. Some people are more desert, mountainous, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, like, it's really disingenuous to the intent of what science is when you're claiming all this unanimity. Science has never been unanimous except for in its search for truth. That's the only thing that science has ever been unanimous on, is that it is a tool base and a tool method in order to search for the truth. And we don't fundamentally know what the truth is with the situation. But okay, let's say 97% again agree that there's anthropogenic climate change. What are we gonna do? And the solutions are wide and various, and there are no unanimous solutions being proposed right now. I can tell you that for certainty. And wind and solar, that's kind of another portion of what we wanted to get into. I'm not sure if it's worth getting into this time. We're saving it for another time. I don't know what you think.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe we close this one off and touch on that on the next one.
Okay. Yeah. Let's touch on, because this really does tie into the use of wind and solar, which is kind of, I alluded to at the beginning, was what we were going to talk about, but we didn't really get into that too much. But it does tie into this as the continuation of the discussion, because, okay, it's 97% agree that there's anthropogenic climate change, but what do we do about it? So then this is where people propose, okay, we need wind power, we need solar power, but then we need to look at those technologies with a closer lens, and we're going to leave it off at that. And for the next one, we're going to dive deeper on looking at, okay, how does wind, how does solar work? How much area do we actually need for these solar power generating facilities, these wind power facilities? And what that means, for example, in terms of farmland that's consumed. Sometimes people talk about that. Oh, we're gonna use up all our farmland for all these solar farms and whatnot. Well, we'll actually have some numbers for you in terms of how much of that farmable area could potentially be taken up by these solar farms or wind farms. And also just looking at how our political elites, how our political leader class has analyzed these as being the top priority, the number one solution, right? We need battery technology with wind and solar and all that good stuff. And yeah, we're going to dive deeper on all that fun, techie, geeky stuff. So tune in for the next episode of First Principles Podcast where we'll do that. And thanks for joining us this time. On First Principles Podcast, we really went in on some new formatting, went in on some of the, the media clips that exist out there that really portray certain biases that we disagree with, or not even that we disagree with, but we just want to point out as being disingenuous. And we're going to be doing more of that kind of stuff, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to say that this is an evolving podcast. If you've been listening from the beginning, you're going to hear us change up the format a bit here. What I would like to get to eventually is a format that has a consistency to it, and we're working towards that, and there's more to come in terms of how you could support it if you do like what we're doing here. So just stay tuned, and but hopefully you liked this new concept of media dissection. I think it's been helpful in terms of us getting our point across, because it's easy for us to say A and B said this and that, but to actually hear these actual politicians, these CEOs say these things, it's very powerful, I think. And I hope to do more of this as we go on, but keeping with our roots of first principle, where we get into the calculations. Trees and myself, we're both engineers at heart. We want to continue to do the calculations part of it.
Yep. And we're gonna get into that next time, 100%.
Listen, this is a changing landscape here. The moving from a fossil fuel driven grid to this hybrid system of renewable energy, it's going to be complex, and it needs to be done. It needs to be done with lots of considerations done depending on where you're implementing this technology. And so we're going to try to show how broad policies can be problematic, and unique solutions should be sought after for a lot of these transitions. But I think it can be done, and the ideal for outcome for me would be a transition that has the least impact on everybody, and I think that's what everybody's going for. And the transition will never completely remove fossil fuels from the picture, but more on that in the next podcast, because I think we should wrap this shit up.
Too much. Well, that was First Principles Podcast. Thank you very much, guys. See you next time. Peace.
Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace. Peace.